Did you know that our brain's most fundamental job is to ensure our survival? And that comes fundamentally first above anything else, including living miserably. And I say this because I think sometimes that we give ourselves a hard time and we assume that logic should always just take that front seat. And I'm going to explain why it doesn't. And I just want to kind of clarify as well, a threat can be physical, but it can also be something emotional or mental. And it often can actually be to do with something that sits outside of our capacity, or it can even be to do with a threat to our sense of self and our sense of identity. What we do when we feel a sense of threat, and again, I don't mean rationally or logically, I just mean our body, our brain is interpreting that there is some sort of threat going on. What we do to act on that threat and act to minimize or reduce the threat that we are experiencing will determine fundamentally the long lasting effects of how that lives inside our body. The more effective that we take action and the more that we are able to take control again over what we are experiencing, the quicker that we will return to kind of homeostasis, and that threat ultimately won't live in our body long term. However, on many occasions, many people will experience a threat that either they might not see as a threat or that they are not able to have any element of control over. And that threat, because it is not able to be effectively dealt with, ends up living in the body and releasing the stress hormone cortisol long after the event has passed. When we are experiencing the constant release of that stress hormone being flooded through our body, and we are not listening to our kind of alarm system, the signaling system, which is our emotions, by the way, and what it is telling us, our bodies and the systems that it has begins to get really confused. Although naturally, intrinsically, we know to keep out the bad and let in the good, that is what our immune system does. What the immune system ends up doing is being confused by how you are responding to your emotions, and it wonders whether it has got it wrong. Research suggests, when I was reading The Body Says No, The Hidden Cost of Stress by Gabor Mate, he suggests that in the research that the immune system is actually not necessarily even a mirror to the emotional system. In fact, it is one of the same. And that is why we see a lot more research, probably actually years of research, that could probably back up the fact that if you are not listening to your own internal signaling system, your emotions that are telling you no and saying, I'm not comfortable with this, I'm feeling extremely unhappy, and you're kind of minimizing that or pushing that away and doing maybe the opposite to that. That could be anything. It could be ignoring the threat. It could be people pleasing. It could be not ensuring that a boundary might need to be in that space. Your immune system will eventually mirror the emotional system. It will learn to let in the bad and not keep it out, and not necessarily understand when to let in the good, because it is basically mirroring what you are doing. And this is the golden bit, so please stay for this. I read this and I will put up some pages as I'm kind of, when I go back and edit this video. But when I was reading The Body Keeps the Score, he talks about how the brain is fundamentally built from the bottom up. You might wonder, why is that so important, Jade? I'll tell you why it's so important. Because I see time and time again clients that I work with who beat themselves up that they can't override their emotional responses, why they can't use their sense of rationale to override the physical reactions that they're having. And I feel like this explains it really well. Trauma and stress that are trapped in the body will cost you greatly. The rationale and the rational logical part of our brain is actually in fact the youngest part of our brain, and it only takes up about 30% of the space. And he suggests in his research that the brain is actually built from the bottom up. And basically, he goes on to explain that the first fundamental part of the brain is the part of the brain, evolutionary wise, that has been there the longest, which is the reptilian brain, which is responsible for things like the things that we can do basically without even thinking about it. The things that you can do as a baby. So that could be wetting, that can be going to the toilet, that can be eating, crying out to make sure that your needs are met, needing sleep, feeling pain, feeling temperature. Then the next part of the brain that we have that evolved was the limbic brain, which is like the equivalent of like the mammal brain, which is responsible basically for feeling emotion and needing connection and living as a social animal, being very aware to monitor danger. And this is the golden bit. When the threat response is activated, your brain will move into a survival response, which means until the threat is dealt with effectively, which shows the importance of listening to yourself and building a healthy relationship where you understand yourself, you understand your messaging and signaling system, you understand your emotions, you understand what you can tolerate and what you cannot, you understand what your body is receiving as a threat and why. Until you can do that, and until you can reduce the threat to the brain, that part of your brain, the logical part of your brain that you're always fighting with and wondering why it isn't able to be active or present in those times when you are having a meltdown or an emotional response, it will not be able to be accessed again until there is a reduce in the threat and the stress hormone in the body. I say this not to make you feel helpless. I actually say this, in fact, to help you regain some level of control over your life, because it also helps you understand that it's not a you problem, that actually you're not doing anything fundamentally wrong. In fact, everybody is in the same position until they learn not only this, but how to deal with this. This also explains why the more chronic stress you have, the more that your physical body will start to show you its distress. How this will then filter out into your emotions and your ability to connect and feel safe. And how that logical part of your brain, that rationale, as intelligent as we are, which we are, will only be able to be accessed again once you have minimized the threat. And the brain does not care what you think to the threat, about how unrealistic that threat is or how you shouldn't be responding in the way that you are. It just feels it. And you have to listen to it, because the moment you do, the moment things begin to improve, the moment that you stop making yourself feel bad and you start to offer yourself grace and understanding and you work with it in a different way, is the moment that things begin to start to feel better. And I'm not saying that that route is super easy. I'm just saying that once you understand it and once you start working in a way that is beneficial for you, I can guarantee you will not go back. You already know now that the cost is too great not to. But when you begin to start to feel some relief, you'll understand even deeper that the cost was always too high. So what are the things that I suggest that you do? You begin to recognize, understand the whys of why your emotions are showing up. You begin to listen to them. You begin to listen to the message and you begin to decode and you begin to address and work with them, not against them. I think that self-validation is really important. So many people are seeking validation outside of themselves. That's for a whole nother video. But self-validation, learning to go, do you know what? Yes, I do feel like that. And I'm not ashamed of that, because it wouldn't be signaling to me in this way if there wasn't something that I should be listening to. And learning to do that and show up for yourself. And that can be things like validating yourself, validating your experience, setting boundaries, because it might not be the way that somebody else works, but it's the way that you work. And there's something that you might need to listen to yourself on. It's also important, and again, I would suggest doing this with a professional, or somebody that you trust well, but I would say a professional because they know what they're doing. If you find a good one, private is really, really great. I know that that's not accessible to everybody, but it is great finding that person for you. But going back and releasing those past stresses and traumas that are stored in the body, because I can tell you now, if your nervous system is dysregulated, there is stress and there is trauma stored in your body. And the third thing I would say is learning when to ask for support, and not and good support, not just support in general, because not everybody is supportive and not everybody will meet you in the way that you need to be met, but just knowing when to say I need help. We all do. We all need help at some point. We are a social being, and finding the right connection, the right community of people, and the right support is golden. I hope this has been helpful. Please let me know your thoughts on this, and let me know if you've got anything to add, or whether you knew some of these things. The sources of which I found most of this information was from 3 books, which is The Deepest Well, The Body Keeps a Score, and When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress. I will speak to you soon.